Just stay right like that, Katie. You'll be fine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 20th edition of the Literacy Research Association's Research to Practice show. Now, this show is designed to serve researchers, pre-service teachers, educators everywhere, and connect to our literacy work that we are doing through LRA, the Literacy Research Association, to a much broader audience. Today, we have an amazing panel. And we are going with our new format where we are taking chapters from the Literacy Research Theory, Method, and Practice, the former yearbook publication, and highlighting that high-quality research that was presented at the annual conference. And each month we will be talking with a group of chapter authors. And today we are joined by three amazing scholars who are going to talk about their paper, The Appropriation of the Coaching with Care Model with Pre-Service Teachers. Basically trying to get at the role of community. How do we build this idea of community? And we are joined by Jim Hoffman, Beth Malik, and Melissa Wetzel, and I'm going to give them each a chance to introduce themselves. So why don't we start on the left with Jim.
I'm Jim Hoffman, faculty member here at the University of Texas at Austin. And in language and literacy studies, most of us have the same introduction.
Right.
All right, so just say your names so people can put a name to a face for what I just read. Right.
I'm Beth Malik. I'm also in language and literacy studies here at UT, and I have a secondary role as associate dean overseeing our teacher ed programs in the college.
And I'm Melissa Wetzel, and I'm also here at the University of Texas at Austin in language and literacy studies.
So that's so welcome all, because I'm really excited to talk about today's paper, mainly because this was just one study in a much larger project that I think is going to be really informative for our audience. So why don't you guys give us a brief introduction into what exactly is the care model and your work?
So I've been tapped to do the background on the model and our work within the care model. And it's always hard in these instances to know how far back to go to talk about context. But basically, I think it's important in terms of our work to know that we are very involved and committed inside of our pre-service teacher education program here at the University of Texas and have been for many, many, many years. We're very committed to a field-based program. So every year and a half, we have cohorts that start off and run for 3 semesters through a professional development sequence. And inside that professional development sequence, we teach most of the literacy courses that the students take, as well as additional courses that they take. Our program is field-based. This is rare that you would find the 3 of us here on campus, because mostly we spend our time in schools. We have an elementary school where our cohort is based. And in that elementary school, we use that as our home base, and then our students work out in other schools as well. It's a program that's very committed to schools that serve low-income Hispanic communities primarily. So it's a large ESL focus within our program. All of our students completing the undergraduate program do a minor. It's not called a minor. It's called an ESL
endorsement.
An ESL certification as part of their undergraduate work. So the 3 of us have led those cohorts over the years. It's been, I think, one of our sort of grounding points in terms of thinking about community, that over the course of a year and a half, you begin to build this strong community of learners, of teachers, coming through this program, and they see the importance and value of working with each other collectively and collaboratively. The story sort of parallels a story that we also have a graduate program, doctoral students and so on that work here at the university. And as part of their field experiences, those students come through a course for working in field settings. Supervision of teaching is the title of the course. And a lot of our work inside of the building of the care model probably originated in the work inside of that supervision course as we started to think with our university facilitators how they engage with our pre-service teachers inside of practice. And so we were preparing our graduate students to do this kind of thing at the same time as we were working with our cohort students inside of our teacher preparation model. What we began to think about at that point was the sort of missing link in that triad, and that was the cooperating teacher. We've had cooperating teachers that have worked with our program over the years. We love them. They're fantastic teachers. But we've really not had the opportunity to spend time with them in deeply sort of considering their role inside of this development of expertise as teachers. And so Melissa and I and Beth, I'm not sure if did we write a grant proposal? We probably wrote some grant proposal. I'm not sure if it was ever funded.
It was a Spencer small grant.
Spencer small grant. That eventually got us launched into starting a master's program that would bring cooperating teachers into a professional development leadership role, leadership and mentoring role inside of our graduate master's program, and that we would match that cohort of master's teachers up with our cohorts of undergraduate teachers. So in many ways, it was sort of an ideal setting that we were now able to speak both to our pre-service teachers as well as our cooperating teachers, as well as our university facilitators, inside of a way of thinking about practice and developing expertise as a literacy teacher in a classroom. And so that was sort of the context for the roots of our work within the model. The model itself, hang on, my computer went on sleep. The model itself was constructed, I guess, in some ways with our practicing teachers. We think of the model mostly in terms of sort of the practice turn in teacher education. So within our program, we really don't think about competencies, isolated skills, any kind of checklist way of thinking about what teachers do as they become more powerful in their teaching. We tend to think about teaching more as a practice and in terms of sort of the LAVE idea of communities of practice, and thus our connection back to this idea of the importance of community. These people, these undergraduates that are coming to our program, are really learning how to do teaching by becoming participants in teaching inside their classrooms. And what we want to do is to support the ways in which they think about teaching as a practice. And as we've done that, we've thought a lot about activity theory. You'll see it features within our model. And that is the idea that as teachers, as pre-service teachers, as teacher educators, we're always engaged in some kind of work that's goal-directed. And inside that work, we're constantly drawing on and taking on certain kinds of roles. We're certainly working within different kinds of communities of people that serve different roles. And we're drawing on different tools to support the kind of work that we do. We draw particularly on Engerstrom's work, where he talks about the notion of tensions inside of activity systems, and how those tensions that exist within activity systems are often spaces in which practice can lead to growth and lead to actually the encountering of new tensions as we sort of appropriate the work that we're doing in our classroom. And so those terms of appropriation, that is basically taking on practices, taking on new practices, exploring the tensions that arise inside those practices, inside the tools that we use, the roles that we take on, and the others that we work with, are all spaces that are important for us as we think about this sort of model. Now, can we show us that picture?
Yeah, so in the Google Doc, which I think people have access to, is that right, Greg? So in the Google Doc, I don't hear Greg. In the Google Doc,
my fault, I didn't unmute. Yes, they do have the Google Doc, and I will send it out on Twitter right now as well.
We have dropped in several documents that provide a model of an articulation of our coaching with care model, a graphic of our model of coaching with care, and then a couple of pictures. And so I think Jen's going to talk from those.
So the term, the coaching, if you look at, there's really two pictures, two of the figures that are most important. One is sort of a graphic figure that displays, there it is, let's put that up there. One is sort of a graphic display that sort of describes the cycle that we work within in terms of this coaching model. Now, this is a coaching model that's applied and used and drawn on both by our cooperating teachers and by our university facilitators, and we'll talk about that as we move forward. It's a cycle that attends a lot to this notion of reflection. When we do that, we draw a lot on Dewey. We draw on a lot of people who have written about reflection, particularly, and other people who think about reflection as the mechanism by which practice grows, right?
Mm-hmm.
So look at the model. We have sort of divided into this reflecting into practice, reflecting in practice, reflecting on practice, and reflecting for practice. You'll also see there's another big part of the model that's this reflecting around practice. And what we try to do is to think about those moments in which reflective thought takes place. What Dewey talks about, it's this notion of a fork in the road, that our lives are filled with choices, and in fact those choices are decisions that we make anticipating certain consequences, and those choices lead us down certain kinds of paths that we work through. So from an activity perspective, an activity theory perspective, what we're looking at is that the work people are doing as teachers is constantly filled with kinds of decisions that they're making. And what we want to do is to sort of look carefully at those kinds of decisions and find ways to focus on those decision points and talk about those in ways that allow us to grow in our understanding.
Well, in many ways, going back to Engstrom's activities theory, I see you folks really messing with that. You know, I'm going back to the triangle off the top of my head, so I might say things wrong. But this idea that you're messing with the division of labor by creating that sense of community, in a sense, by having both horizontal and vertical leadership at the same time between, you know, you have the master's teachers working with the pre-service teachers, and in a sense, you're creating that community, which is, I guess, you know, pretty cool. So yeah, I'll pull that up right now in the next picture. So yeah, oh wow, that's interesting. I'm looking at it now. You guys, that's cool.
That was a construction that we did as part of the first class that we taught that was on the care model. And actually, so we use the traditional sort of triangle notion, but you'll also see within that the sort of cycle that goes through in terms of working within that activity system, and drawing on different aspects of community and different types of tools. The main tool that we're drawing on inside of this particular representation is the coaching model itself. Language and the purposes and the structures that exist. So you think about it back to the other picture, the other illustration, excuse me. We talk about a cycle, and this is a fairly, again, traditional sort of clinical practice, like pre-conference, post-conference kind of work that we do inside of practice. We draw also on cognitive coaching as being a reflective model, and we do sort of frame this model from a very reflective rather than a sort of a fidelity kind of perspective. We actually have another article in which we describe the differences between a fidelity model, sort of an evaluative model of coaching, versus this reflective model of coaching that we're working with. If you look on the cycle, basically pre-conference is that moment that we're meeting before the teaching. We think about that as a very, very small moment in which we're trying to tap into the lesson image that a teacher, a pre-service teacher, or a practicing teacher has as they're going into their teaching. And it's really about surfacing sort of that model and where they are in their heads as they're stepping into practice. We try to get that conversation as close to practice as possible. So literally, it's a 5-minute conversation, stepping into the room, getting ready to do some teaching. We'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the kinds of invitations that we make, the kinds of language that we use. The reflecting in practice is focused on the changes. This is a shown kind of an idea that we're interested in the kinds of decisions that were made inside of practice in which some adjustment was made from the original plan, the kinds of data sources that were used to make those decisions and draw on those decisions and those choices, and also what kind of other choices were considered and not taken in terms of the different paths that you could choose.
Now, with the reflecting in practice, are you as observers, are you the ones determining if that adjustment, database adjustment was made, or is that something the teacher and you do when they're reflecting on practice in the post-conference?
Anybody can jump in and talk about these because my voice is going to wear out in just a second. So we actually, the role of the observer inside of this cycle is actually set inside that pre-conference. And basically what we try to frame a lot of the attention. So one of the big sort of approaches we take here is, and this has to do with feedback. So our students are always sort of, I want feedback. Give me feedback on what I did. And our message is always your feedback is right in front of you. Your feedback is coming from your students. And what our job is as facilitators, as coaches, is to help you understand that feedback and be responsive to that feedback in the ways that make you more powerful as a teacher. Now that's easy to say sometimes. It's not hard for them because they always want to know good job. They want to know how they did. They want to know what they did right, what they did wrong. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us in some of the studies that we've been doing and actually preparing our pre-service teachers to enter into this kind of model. So go back, so what we do in that pre-conference, one of the little twists that we do there is ask the pre-service teacher, what would you like me to watch for? What data would you like me to collect inside of this teaching that you're going to be doing? And we very much try to focus it on data that's around kids and not around them. So I want you to look at me while you're, that's not the kind of thing that we would sort of talk about. And we give them examples of the kind of data that we can collect. We might focus on kids, a particular group of kids or a couple of kids. We might focus on the language itself that the teacher uses. So we might actually transcribe some dialogue that goes on between teachers and students or between students. We might do some post-interviews of students after the lesson is over. So there's lots of ways in which we can collect data that we then bring forward into the post-conference that we do. Now, it's not a gotcha post-conference. It's not one of those that we would come in right away and say, well, you said you were going to do this, and look at what you did. You'll see we approach the post-conference very much from this reflective stance in which we invite them to talk about what they've been thinking about coming out of that lesson. Okay? And what we do is we delay that. So this has been a very important part of our work. Is creating a space between that immediate completion of their teaching and going away and sort of having some time to let it all sort of seep in and process. And then the post-conference often starts out with, what have you been thinking about since you're teaching? And then our coaches come with what we call a game plan. That is, they have their data. They have some things that they might want to focus on if they need to focus on that inside of the conversation that they're going to have with the student. But they're very much going to be focused on probing the reflection that the teacher did inside that practice and looking at choices that they made and so on.
So, Beth, when Jim says that you guys aren't really, there's not a competency-based approach, is there not a, I'm thinking of Danielson rubric or your UT Austin rubric or the Austin Public Schools rubric that these observations are being based upon? Are you not using one during these observations?
Well, that's a good question, Greg. We talk about this a lot in our group because we are still, as an institution, our teacher ed program, we're still held to state requirements in terms of how we evaluate our student teachers, how we make decisions about whether or not we certify them. So there is what we call a evaluation that happens in semesters prior to student teaching and all throughout their program, really. And then a summative evaluation, which does list a set of competencies or behaviors, the kinds of things that we're looking for in our student teachers. But it is not the case that those evaluations guide our observations. So we don't go into each observation with a set of competencies.
Okay.
Across our entire program, we go into observations with a more open-ended documentation of what's happening and discussion around those things. The students are aware of the evaluation, so they know that list of behaviors, I guess. And then there's an evaluation at the end of the semester, which is a definite tension, particularly with students who are going through a program where they're living inside of this coaching and reflective model, that at the end of the semester there is an evaluation. So we just live in that tension right now. We have not resolved that tension.
So one of the things that we do, and this is and I wish I could show again that picture back with the triangle because it doesn't really show up there. So one of the things that we don't have an evaluation model, but we do have what we call an activity configuration. I'm sorry, I hate that language, and Melissa's going to give us better words for doing this eventually. But what we do with our students is we have practices inside of what our students are doing in life. So we have read aloud practices. And so what we do is we take a read aloud, and with our students, we sort of deconstruct that activity structure with our students and talk about critical sort of elements of a read aloud, the kinds of things that we're working on and trying to do. We give representations of those in terms of watching videos, watching us, watching each other, and looking at these practices. So a lot of the framing of the cycle is often around these representations or these activity structures that literacy instruction gets done with. And if you look at that model, what we can do is we can flip it around, because we're looking at it from a model of the observer, a cooperating teacher watching a pre-service teacher. But before that ever happens, it's been flipped around so that the pre-service teacher is actually observing this cycle, using this cycle, the cooperating teacher that they're in their classroom with. Does that make sense? So for example, a representation of a read aloud in that classroom is the teacher doing a read aloud with the students. And what the pre-service teacher will do is pre-conference with the teacher, post-conference with the teacher, plan with the teacher, basically doing the same cycle, but from the side of being an observer, so that then we move into co-teaching, doing it together, and then we move into that flipped role where the cooperating teacher is actually using the model to observe the pre-service teacher. That sounds very confusing, but I hope it sounds powerful too, because it's pretty cool the way that brings them into this, what we think about as a community of practice. This is a path into a community of practice. So it's not, so when you ask the question, I guess it's not random. We do have frames that we're using inside of the work and the activity that they're doing, but we don't come with a checklist on it. So did we want to look at a post? Or do you want
that's what I was saying. I was just going to point out that on the Google Doc, above this, there is a Coaching with Care model that spells out what CARE stands for. So we have that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we see a post-conference?
What do you think, Melissa? Do you want
Sure. I'm not sure what I'm hearing, but the Coaching with Care model, the acronym, actually came after the first year of work. So the first year of work, we were working with existing models, and the CARE acronym came as we began to start to make sense of what was happening through our research. And mostly we started with this notion. We often flip the letters from CARE, and we start with the E, because we start with this notion of practice. So the experiential learning, this learning through practice, authentic experiences with teaching, that's really the center and the core of the model. And then comes the reflection. So the reflection is the processes that that Jim just finished talking about. That reflection is not just something that happens after, but it's a process that's embedded throughout the teaching cycle. The appreciative stances is the A, and that's a really important part, because one thing that we focus on a lot with coaches, and all along, all throughout our program with undergraduates as well, is this idea that that we can only learn alongside students and grow with students when we're able to identify their strengths and what their the areas in which they're working and developing and growing. And so taking our attention away from what's not there, what's missing, what's deficit, and really focusing on appreciating students and what they're bringing. And that crosses, I think we have kind of parallel goals in terms of culturally responsive instruction and valuing students' languages and what they bring from their homes, their funds of knowledge, and their communities. So it's about taking this stance both towards our students, but then also coaches taking that same stance, and us taking that same stance towards our pre-service teachers too, and thinking about everything they're doing as strategic work inside of these classrooms. And then the last piece is C, and we started out thinking about C as one thing, and our C has expanded to be many things. So it's a critical focus, and that means critical in terms of how we're thinking about critical social issues, ideas of power and representation inside of our teaching, but also how our coaching questions the structures that we're working within. So, for example, one of the main areas of tension that came up right away in our work was around testing and how preparation for state tests constrained or changed the opportunities for teaching that happen in our classrooms. So taking a look at how our teaching decisions are mediated by critical social issues, but then also larger structures within the schools has been the way we've thought about C. And now C also stands for collaborative coaching and content-focused coaching, and we keep expanding in the community. So C, yes, C, it's helpful to have C in the acronym.
Well, word of advice: we can, as teachers, we can break our addiction to acronyms and just, I can't. I always want an acronym for every project I do, so I understand.
And part of a nice part of this acronym is as we do use that general notion of care, and we draw on Nadi's work, we draw on a lot of people who write about that caring principle in terms of how we engage with each other inside of our practice. So it does work nicely in both ways, both as a generative word to describe our work, as well as an acronym.
We'll just say it's a big C instead of many C's. It's
Well, and interestingly, so Melissa was talking about that sort of. There's a nice part of Sean's work, Sean and ours, which is about governing variables. That's not thought about a lot in terms of sort of when people with Sean talk about reflecting in and on practice. But this notion of governing variables that, and it's actually very close to the work of Engstrom as well, that a lot of times we get stuck in the ways in which we do things. And we fail to sort of step back from that and do what Sean talks about as this double loop for reflection, where we go back and examine, well, yeah, but that's the way we do it, but why do we do it that way? What other way could we do that? So that it challenges the assumptions of how we do things inside of practice. So that's been a powerful one for us, or one place in which we talk about this critical practice as well.
So do you guys want to, I hear you have an example that you can share. Do you guys want to show that now?
This is an example of a post-conference, right? Yes.
Right. This is is the right one now. So this is coming in the middle of a post-conference, and the cooperating teacher is on the left of the screen, and the pre-service teacher is on the right. And they're at a place in the post-conference where they're talking about what struggles and tensions came up in the lesson. And so you're going to hear the cooperating teacher invite the pre-service teacher to think around this notion of struggle.
You anticipated that there was going to be struggle with the part that focused on the long I and the word slobbering. Yeah. And the word, I think some just word recognition, since they were, the bossy E affecting the O in home. What did you notice, and what did you change?
So what I actually noticed, it was kind of surprising to me, like the word slobbered. I thought they probably, like, that wasn't a word they would be that familiar with, but it seemed like everyone really had a solid understanding of what that meant. Maybe it's because they had already been reading the poem and kind of figured that out. But they also, they seem to, have a better, like, they understood the long I felt, like, better than I expected. And then, what surprised me was that they struggled more with, like, the rhyming words.
Yeah, that was really surprising.
It was weird, because I thought, they'll easily recognize these rhyming words. So I think that was something they struggled with, and I tried to, like, kind of focus more on those, like, specific words, like night and right, and, like, show, and, like, even whenever they would offer up a rhyme that didn't rhyme, I would, like, ask them to repeat it and, like, compare it to words they knew that rhymed, right? Like,
you did. You broke down, you kind of stopped for a second with the poem, and you went into a conversation about rhyming words, so that was kind of its own little, like, focus lesson within the poetry, of the poetry activity. Interesting. So, since there were some changes with the struggles that you noticed, what adjustments did you make in your lesson?
So, a big adjustment that I made was I decided to kind of cut the word work short, you know? So, instead of focusing so much on all of the other because I spent that time focusing on the rhyming words, I thought maybe I won't focus as much on, like, the bossy E tells the O to say its name. I just kind of skipped that part and stuck with the long I's and rhyming words, really.
Okay, so you kind of made some different choices in the activity that you thought would accommodate their needs a little bit better based on what you noticed.
and I didn't want to lose their engagement, and I felt like since we talked about rhyming for a little bit longer, that if we kept talking about the words, they might become disengaged.
Yeah. So thinking about
So what we can talk about there just briefly is you can see how the teacher's naming, the cooperating teacher is helping the pre-service teacher to name the strategies that were in place in her lesson and how she was responding to students. And she's doing most of the talking. She's talking about the things that she was able to adjust and change in response to the students. And she talks about engagement. She centers her reflections on what she's bringing from the students. So you can see all of those kind of elements of that care model in place in this very short interaction.
So I guess you can see also this notion of struggle and choices just comes up again and again. In the pre-conference, we don't ask very many questions inside the pre-conference. Almost a standard one is, what are the students going to struggle with inside this lesson? What do you see the challenges for them, not for you? What do you see the challenges for them? And we're sort of planting that seed that there should always be challenges, and that those kinds of challenges that arise are going to be challenges for you in which you make certain kinds of choices. And what we want to do, so what we really work on is a lot of the language and strategies that the teachers use around that. So if you go back to that figure that has the activity theory triangle, from the very first semester, what we're doing there is watching videos together, looking at interactions inside of the coaching conferences, and capturing phrases and sort of discourse moves that seem to be powerful in terms of helping that teacher process that experience and grow from that experience. So on that figure, you can see all kinds of notes that are given, phrases that are used. So for example, we're very adamant in the model about sort of praise, that the notion of "I like that" is not an empowering sort of word choice to engage with. So we try to eliminate, and this is really hard, to pull out all that praise language and be able to turn that around in terms of, as Melissa said, noticing and naming, examining, looking at choices that were made, pulling back and saying, what are the choices could you have made at that point, or did you consider at that point, and why did you choose the one that you ended up with? And in all of this, we really resist this "I would have done this," or the question of "what would you have done?" because that's not helpful again for what the student is experiencing. And we really want to focus on that language of making choices, thinking about consequences, and moving down a particular path and what you did with that. Eventually moving to the other part of the model, which is a shift in the post-conference, which moves from looking back to looking forward. So inside of this model and we're beginning to use the term refraction rather than reflection as this transition point, where it's not looking back with, oh my God, I should have, but let's understand it so that looking forward, what are we going to take forward in terms of an action plan for our work?
So, for example, in the video we just saw, she said, "Well, she was focusing. Oh, they're struggling with the rhyming words." To me, it looked kind of like, well, no, they figured out the CVCE long I words. It was the IGH, the GH long I words that the kids were struggling with. But you're saying not to really point out, those kinds of differences in, phonics in that one tiny example, but to look forward or.
Not in that moment of reflecting on your practice. What we would do and could do is say, okay, let's start thinking about, and this has been really important for us, how we could take this forward. So that it's not you language, it's we language actually helps the process of transitioning into, okay, moving forward, what could we do? A lot of our teachers worry that, well, when do I get to tell them what they should have done? And we try to emphasize that that's really not helpful in terms of them understanding and learning through practice that they can take forward in their careers as teachers. But there is a point at which we transition this into, okay, let's think forward now of where we're going to go next. And then that language becomes the planning language, the collaborative language in which I can suggest stuff too for us to think about that we might do, and it becomes a conversation toward what we call our planning conversations.
It's a growth model versus an assessment model in a sense.
And so I think this is a good place for me to come in with the work from this actual paper that we have here. So I think what Jim and Melissa have talked about and set up is the coaching with care model is more of a reflective model versus an evaluative model, and moving teachers and coaches away from the traditional, 3 positives and 1 place to grow kind of post-conference into a more reflective conference structure, which was hard to do because teachers come in. Our interview data and our work with teachers suggests that most of our teachers, when they come into our program as cooperating teachers, they learned through a coaching model that was evaluative, or what Jim referred to earlier as kind of a fidelity model. They have always coached from an evaluative stance. So it's a significant shift. And so our first analysis, we're in year 4 of this study. So this paper comes from year 1. But we had a couple of analyses before this paper. In our initial analysis, we wanted to look at the appropriation of the model by cooperating teachers. So our first group of 10 teachers, in what ways did they appropriate the model into their coaching practice, and in what kinds of tensions emerged out of that appropriation process? So we had that kind of analysis. And then this analysis came after that one, because in that first analysis, what the teachers kept talking about was the value of having a community of practice around how they learned about this coaching model. So this paper looks at that community with a real focus on the master's program, which Jim mentioned, but didn't talk as much about the structure. So these students came in, I call them students, they're cooperating teachers who are our master students. They come in, they take a summer institute really focused on literacy instruction, and then they come into the fall and they take that course on coaching and mentoring that Jim was referring to in the fall. And in the spring, they would take a classroom discourse and teacher research course that looked at classroom discourse and how you might investigate that in your own classroom. But we continue to coaching focus into that course. So they take a whole set of courses together as a cohort, and they also start in the fall with an intern. So they start with one of our literacy undergraduates in the fall, where they're in these classrooms 2 days a week. So they're hosting an intern. In the spring, those students become student teachers, so they're all day, every day. So we have these cooperating teachers who are our master students, who are going through a program and taking courses together while also hosting a student teacher. So that's the overall structure. So what this paper looked at is what are those spaces inside that program that allowed for this community building, a place to sort of grapple with the model, grapple with coaching. And really it was a matter of translating this sort of theoretical discussion of coaching and reflective coaching into an on-the-ground enactment of coaching. And what we talk about in the paper is the way, and going back to activity theory, is the way our teachers were moving across activity settings. So they were moving from this graduate school in class together. They were moving from that activity setting where we were talking about certain kinds of ways of coaching, and then they're moving into their schools, and they're all in different schools. And so into the activity setting of schools where there's different kinds of goals, there's different constraints, there's different tools available, and how they translate this theoretical coaching model into practice. And so there were several places in the program that we found supported that process. So there's 3 we talk about in the paper. One is the blog. So the blog that accompanied that fall course, where every time they read, and the instructor of that course had them read, Mark, had them read a lot. And so every time they read something, they posted to the blog. They posted responses to the blog. They responded to each other. Mark, the instructor, responded. We saw that as a place where they really grappled with sort of theoretical and conceptual foundations, like working through these ideas. And that blog was a beginning for the face-to-face discussion. So they started with the blog, and then they lifted quotes from the blog and brought it into the face-to-face class, where they continued those discussions. We don't talk about that a whole lot in the paper. It was an important piece of building conceptual foundations, but we really focus more on the next two spaces, which included something that happened in the fall course that the instructor called What's Up. He started every course with sharing experiences. So how are things going? So if you remember, they're hosting a student teacher in their classroom, and so at the beginning of every week, there was a discussion about how is it going in the field, what's happening. That was a pretty lengthy discussion as people shared their, here's what I'm struggling with, here's where I feel tension. So there was a lot of community building around that and a lot of working through what this coaching model actually looks like in practice. So that was one space. And the other space that we found very, very powerful, and we continue to find very powerful, is debriefing around videos of post-conferences. So you saw the video of one of the post-conferences. Part of the structure of the fall and spring course were to bring in, all the teachers were recording their post-conferences. So they brought them into the class, and they showed the videos. They usually selected a few moments from that video that they found compelling or interesting or confusing, and they would share their video. And Melissa's just put a screenshot of what these groups look like. So they're got a computer, they're watching the post-conference, and we ended up calling this time Coaching the Coach. So it was an opportunity to see coaching in practice and to wander around those conversations, to think about what people were saying, why they said it. Inside that context, we saw things like rehearsing language. The teachers were, it's a hard thing to move out of your sort of habitual ways of interacting with student teachers and thinking of new ways to speak into student teachers' struggles or challenges. And so people were wondering about language, and so they saw each other and what they said, and so I might be watching the video that Melissa's coaching, and I might say, stop that video, let's talk about that. And I'll say, well, why did you choose to step in there with that kind of statement or question? So there was a lot of coaching around or discussion around the coaching. We have continued that this happened in year one. We've continued that really throughout the project. It's just been a really powerful place to think about coaching. And we
also the second article in the same issue of the journal does focus a little bit more, or focuses squarely on that language, that kind of coaching the coach work. And so there's the framework is the teachers are doing discourse analysis of practice when they're working together in this way.
Yeah.
We did have one question come in from Twitter. Was basically, how did this work with the public school systems regarding placement? Did this make placing your student teachers harder? The master having, because there's now 3 people: the intern, the coach, and the student in the one classroom. How did you guys deal with your local schools?
There were really no problems. I mean, we worked with a lot of teachers that we had already been working with. And when we sent out, we did not say this, and I think it's important, that we offered funding, a small amount for these master teachers. We offered, we invited them into a master's program. A requirement of joining us would be that they would host a student teacher, and with principal support. So we had them sign off, the principal sign off, said they supported it. And then we offered them money, some funding towards the master's program. It would probably cover about a third of their master's program, so it was not substantial, but it was enough for people to be interested. And so the placement part of it was actually fine. We did have a part of the process of our interview sort of admissions process where we went out and observed the teacher. Some of these teachers we've worked with for years, so we already knew them really well, and they came back for their masters. Other teachers we were just meeting through this interview process, and so we felt it was important to go out and see them teaching. So we did that. But in terms of placing with school districts, it was really it was really fine. We have a pretty robust placement system in place already for a much larger program, and this program dealt with maybe 10 teachers, so it was a much smaller piece.
Another question from some of our viewers was around your institutional review board and video and non-anonymizing, data and people. Was that an issue? How did you deal with getting, non-anonymized video data in your research study?
It's kind of our lives, do that.
Yeah. So we had IRB approval.
Yeah.
And we were approved to conduct video taping. And now I can't remember the ins and outs of most of the video we're looking at and we're analyzing are videos of the adults, of the teachers working with our master students. So
no film of the kids, which was, just makes it that much harder.
The film with the kids, so what happens is you can see from the screenshot right now is that the teachers are bringing in videos of the pre-service teachers teaching as part of this coaching the coach. So they show their pre-conference, they show a little bit of what's happening in the classroom to give some context for the post-conference, and then they show the post-conference. But all of the talk is around the coaching. So the video with kids in it helps the teachers to coach each other around practice, but it's not part of our, we don't analyze what the pre-service teacher is doing with kids as part of the project.
And so that helps a lot with us. So that's
I'm just waiting up. No other questions. So we have about 15 minutes left. So what do you guys see then? I'm going to move into kind of the how does this play out in regular classroom practice? Where do you guys see, what can classroom teachers, instructional coaches, teacher evaluation systems, what can they learn from your project?
Well, just to start off that conversation, so we talked about this being year, the piece in this that we discussed is from year 1, and so we did a few things in years 2, 3, and 4 based on what we've been learning through this design and development work. And the first thing is we realized in year 2 that the pre-service teachers really needed to be a bigger part of the exploration of the coaching with care model. So we involved more both working in peer observation situations where they were coaching one another around practice within practicum experiences. So when we're in a school working with kids together with a faculty member. And we also, so we focus more on the pre-service teachers, the importance of the pre-service teachers' participation in this coaching model and what they need to know in order to do that. The other modification we made was the use of video as an important part of the post-conference. So what we call that is RCA, retrospective coaching analysis. But basically we ask pre-service teachers and cooperating teachers to view video and to choose video clips to bring into the post-conference so that they're actually watching teacher moves and reflecting on teacher moves from around video. And then we brought that also into the coaches' work with one another. So the coaches then brought videos of their work with pre-service teachers and really interacted around those videos. So the introduction of video as a way to hold still particular moments to focus on practice was very important. And then the fourth year we worked, also in the third year we also really explored these ideas of co-teaching and shadowing. So we asked questions like, where's the pre-service teacher in the room when the cooperating teacher is teaching? And how can we disrupt that sort of notion of you sit in the back and observe me, but move to more of a shadowing or co-teaching model? And we found that when in doing that, it really changed the power between the pre-service teacher and the cooperating teacher and help them to think more specifically about a team perspective and how we both are working together to support the kids in the classroom and we're both working on our practice. And then in the fourth year, we've now scaled up into more of a professional development setting where we're not just working with master students as cooperating teachers, but we're working with all of the cooperating teachers who want to participate, who work with our pre-service teachers, so about 35 to 50 teachers a year coming to work with us around the Coaching with Care model. So the reason I talk about these 4 different changes is that it really helps us to think about what we're learning from this project that's important about practice. And so the use of video, I mean, we've always known that video cases are useful for teacher education, but what we're learning is that when we have videos of our own practice and we're really looking closely at those and thinking about the talk and how the talk is and the work that the students are doing is helping us to know what kind of learning is happening in the classrooms, that focused use of video within not just video cases of someone else teaching, but our own work as video case is, I think, an important part of how this supports teacher learning. And I think that also this notion of teachers working with novices and developing leadership we often have coaches coming in from the outside and coming into teachers' classrooms to help them to work on their practice. But in these situations, you've got people who are building strong relationships and working together over time. And I think it challenges our notion of how new teachers learn to teach in classrooms. So we might think about now our teacher leaders who have worked with pre-service teachers for a year or 2 becoming leaders in their schools and starting to bring that Coaching with Care model into their work with other novice teachers in their schools as well. So I'm gonna let you.
Well, I was almost in response to the question. I think a lot of our responses of teachers as they become involved with this program is, well, this is just really about good teaching. So many of the practices that they engage with their pre-service teachers really reflect the kinds of language and work that they're doing with their own elementary students in their classrooms. And I think it's been pretty clear that teachers who have moved most smoothly into the model are ones where their classrooms could be characterized in this way, in the ways in which they talk with their students. To teachers who may come from a more traditional kind of structure inside their classrooms and more authoritative kinds of ways of, evaluative ways of engaging the students in their own classroom, find this very, very difficult and a slow process, but one that eventually cycles back to them reflecting on their own practice as teachers as well.
Well, sorry. I'm getting a little echo. I apologize. I have a little delay here. I don't know what's going on. But I'm going to try to stop talking as quickly as possible. So if there's anything you folks would want to add in the last 5 minutes, go ahead now so I can mute.
Okay.
So
looking here at we have next steps.
So I thought also a couple of things that we've been challenged with that we continue to work with. I think, Melissa, were you going to talk about some of those?
I can talk about them. We have 4 things that we are kind of currently struggling with. The first one is, we talked a little bit earlier about our critical focus in coaching. And so part of what we do is we work in schools that are under a lot of pressure in terms of testing and where everyone is very concerned about how students are achieving, how they're and how they feel about school too. So and part of that is thinking about who we are as teachers and how we're responding to students and how we're drawing on what they know and what they're able to do in these very constraining environments. And so what we found is that for some reason it's more difficult for cooperating teachers and pre-service teachers to take up those really important issues when they're working within these coaching cycles. So we've been really challenged to think about how to bring a more critical focus into the coaching model. And so one way we've been working on that is by focusing on ideas of language diversity and language ideology and critical discourse theories, and bringing those into that second semester classroom discourse and teacher research course, so that we can say, well, if we're immersed in thinking about these ideas of equity and language, will those come in more to our coaching? So that's something that we're looking at right now. The second area, which I think is really exciting, is this idea of content-focused coaching. So most of our work is literacy researchers and teacher educators has been focused on the content area of literacy and coaching, and now we're expanding to think about what are the differences in thinking about coaching when science teaching or math teaching, social studies teaching is at the center of our focus. Are there different, are we working within different norms or ideas about how children learn that we need to figure out, that we need to adapt our coaching model to be in alignment with what other disciplines think are important things for teachers to know and be able to do. In terms of the professional development, we're really struggling with this idea of having 12 sessions with teachers instead of having three semesters of coursework with teachers who are learning to coach and mentor in new ways. So thinking about how to adapt our coaching model to a scaled-up version where we have less contact time with teachers that we work with. And then the fourth area is this idea of peer coaching and leadership. And I'm trying to remember exactly what we were thinking about with this last point.
Taking them becoming leaders in their school.
And using this kind of model and working with beginning teachers, induction level teachers. The other thing that's on our list that probably because it's more present is our collaborative coaching work, which has been sort of the work that we've spent a lot of focus on in this past year. And that is this idea that university facilitators come in and observe our pre-service teachers. Cooperating teachers observe our pre-service teachers and engage in these cycles, but they do it independent of each other. And so our work this semester has been to bring it into a collaborative coaching kind of a setting. So the cooperating teacher is constantly observing and interacting with the pre-service teacher. And when the university facilitator comes in for an observation, it's not done separately. It's stepping into that cycle with the cooperating teacher, with the pre-service teacher. So, and that's brought its own set of challenges.
Yeah, so we're trying that out. But one idea behind that is, so the question we keep returning to is how to scale this up. So we've worked over for the first 3 years, we worked with maybe 10 teachers a year. So we have 30 cooperating teachers. This year we have 35 to 35 teachers. So that's 75. We work with hundreds of cooperating teachers. And so thinking about how we scale this up, how we provide support for all of our cooperating teachers. So one idea is this professional development, meet once a month, pay them a little bit of money. They come in once a month, professional development model. So that's one thing we're trying. But part of what we're thinking about in collaborative coaching is, we have the university facilitators who are our graduate students and they are learning this model. So what could happen if we have the university facilitators sit with the cooperating teachers to coach together? Is there some learning that happens in that kind of setting? And I think our answer to that is we don't know yet. Right?
I'm going to have to wrap up now, but I do want to finish. I kind of agree. I think the future is not in fidelity of these research projects, but in forkability. Can you adapt to local context and instead of trying to constrain yourself to one specific model? I've been fascinated by this work. I think what you guys you're pushing the boundaries on coaching and pre-service teaching, because too much of our teacher training is classroom driven with a field work component instead of a field work, with some class components. And it seems like at UT Austin, you folks are really starting to build that like you said, that practice-based, field-based approach, but more so this coaching model that moves from this idea of growth versus assessment and getting these kids into this community. I have been absolutely fascinated by this work. This has been the 20th edition of the Literacy Research Association Research to Practice show, and we hope you join us again next month when we'll be talking about generative learning in a service learning project and field-based teacher education program, learning to become culturally responsive teachers. So next month we are going to be focusing on culturally responsive teaching within service learning projects. We hope to join you then, so thank you. I was your host, Greg McVeary. Your producer was Kathleen today, and we were joined by Jim Hoffman, Beth Malik, and Melissa Wetzel. I want to thank all three of you for joining us today, and Katie, you can sign us off now. Bye, everyone.